All right, next game we're talking about, Dolan, is a massive game in the SEC between Georgia and Ole Miss, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC. Storylines to know is really, this is do or die for Ole Miss in the college football playoff race, because in all likelihood, this game will determine whether or not Ole Miss makes the college football playoff. They're 7-2 right now. They most likely cannot afford another loss if they want to make it into the 12-team college football playoff. But if they beat Georgia, they have a pretty clear path to a 10-2 record with only Florida and Mississippi State left on the schedule. The Gators right now are 4-4 in the year, and maybe Aiden Warner is the quarterback for them in that game. We'll see if DJ Lagway can recover from his injury or not. And obviously Graham Mertz is already out for the season. And the Bulldogs are 2-7 on the year. They're the second worst Power 4 team according to our power rankings. And also, they're also on a backup quarterback because Blake Shapen suffered a season-ending shoulder injury back in September. So a 10-2 SEC team with a win over Georgia is pretty much guaranteed a spot in the college football playoff. But if they don't win this game and they finish 9-3, they're probably not making it to the college football playoff. So this is the biggest game for Ole Miss in years, honestly.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think eventually this season was going to come down to Ole Miss winning these types of games. Now, we thought it would come down to how far they get in the playoff and having to play a team like a Georgia or an Alabama or somebody of that caliber. But the time has come now because, you mentioned it about the rest of their schedule is easy. Well, that can be a detriment, too, if they lose this game, because, honestly, the best win on their schedule is probably that dominant win they had over South Carolina. And that's just not going to be good enough with 3 losses in their a couple of their biggest games of the year, plus having lost to Kentucky. There's really no road, I think, for Ole Miss at 9-3. This is a must-win game. Essentially, the playoffs for them are this week. And if they can find a way to win this week, you mentioned it, 10-2, still actually in contention maybe to make the SEC title game. You could find yourself working some miracles here down on the back end, but the first one has to start in this game against Georgia.
But even at 10-2 and they don't make the SEC title game, beating Georgia and finishing 10-2, you're in the playoff.
Most likely, yeah.
Yeah. So I really think this is a playoff game for Ole Miss. If you win, you're basically getting in as long as you can take care of business the rest of the year. If you lose, you're out. You're done. Dolan, you have the Ole Miss offense that looked incredible against Arkansas after having kind of shaky performances before that. So what should we be looking out for when they have the ball?
So the last 2 weeks against Oklahoma and Arkansas, it started to look better against Oklahoma, and then they teed off on Arkansas. Mm-hmm. Jackson's setting school records for passing yards and all that. Jordan Watkins had a great day. And I think there's a couple of things I want to focus on here, because my 2 issues with Ole Miss's offense when they were having that cold stretch was they weren't running the ball all that great, although the run schemes aren't all that complicated. This team's built around Jackson Dart and their weapons, right? Too reliant on the deep ball, okay? And I think it's just too hit or miss when it comes to that. So without Trey Harris the last couple weeks, who was obviously their best vertical threat, right? And he was teeing off, having a Biletnikoff type of season. They have gone and tried now, because some guys have gotten hurt and struggled, and tried some different personnel on offense, okay? You're seeing Juice Wells is still out there, but he's not getting the target share he did. He's been struggling all season, right? You're seeing more of Jordan Watkins, who had a massive game last week. You're seeing a little more target share for a slot receiver like Caden Lee. You're seeing Daquan Wright more at tight end instead of Caden Priestcorn. They're going to guys who I think are a little more versatile and have done a little more for them underneath, so they're not so reliant on the deep ball. And I think something to point out is what's come back for them is not the deep ball, but the intermediate throws in this 10 to 19 yard range. These are guys, Caden Lee is kind of a classic slot receiver. He's a route runner, right? Jordan Watkins can get down the field some. Even Daquan Wright, mm-hmm, working underneath, he's a better RPO threat when they run that stuff than Caden Priestcorn is, right, on slide routes and things like that. They're finding more options underneath. So what I want to show here is, especially though in that intermediate range with Jackson Dart, he has the highest passing grade and yards per attempt and completion percentage in the country on intermediate throws, okay? It's just a matter of how much they're using him, right? Because he's only tied for 26 in these types of attempts. And it was high in the beginning of the year against the easier part of the schedule. When they were struggling against Kentucky and these other teams and LSU in the middle of their schedule, those attempts kind of went down. And now the last 2 weeks, they started to use this more. They're picking apart the second level of the defense instead of the top level. And as they do that, then they start to bring secondary defenders down, and then they start taking deep shots over the top. A couple of times here with Jordan Watkins. There was a touchdown last week to Juice Wells deep down the right sideline. These are the types of things they need to do. I've been saying it all year. The deep shots are great, and it's a signature of their offense, but they have to set it up. They just have to. And against Georgia, who is notorious for being the team that better than anybody, Kirby Smart's always done this, they prevent deep shots.
Yep.
You have to they're going to make you work for it, right? And last year, the two things Georgia did to beat Ole Miss and dominate Ole Miss was they rushed the passer well, which they're going to do, right? And all the blitzing and all that. And they did not let Jackson Dart. I think he went like 1 for 10 in deep balls in that game or something like that. You're not going to get over the top on them, especially without setting it up. So I think it's Jackson Dart, who right now is the best intermediate passer in the country, continuing to do what he's done the last 2 weeks with Jordan Watkins, with Caden Lee. If Trey Harris is back and healthy, fantastic. They probably need him to win this game, but the formula should not change. They need to set up deep shots. They need to make safeties respect what's in front of them, and then take shots with Harris and with Jordan Watkins over the top when they have the opportunities, not the other way around and forcing it like they were in some of the earlier games this year.
Absolutely. And it's just been so impressive how good this offense has looked the last 2 weeks against pretty good defenses without the guy who's probably the Blitnikoff favorite right now, or at least up there in Trey Harris, because he has been unbelievable. He's averaging like 5.3 yards per route run. Nobody else is like more than 3.8, basically. Like, he has been incredible this year. My matchup to watch on, and I think it's the most must-see matchup in this entire game, is Georgia's offensive line against Ole Miss's defensive line. Not only is the matchup between two elite units, it's also really going to determine how much success Georgia has offensively, because Georgia's pass blocking has been really the only thing going right for them in the passing game lately. Right now, they have the 6th lowest pressure rate allowed in the country at 21%. They're 8th in pass blocking grade with about an 85 mark. And really, if you look at Carson Beck, there is a stark difference between his passing grades when he's kept clean and when he's under pressure. This year, he has an 89.2 passing grade when he's kept clean. That is 25th in the country. When he's under pressure, that drops to a 33.2, which is 117th in college football. So you're talking about a top 25 quarterback in the nation when he's kept clean, and one of the, 25 worst in college football when he's under pressure. That is just not going to get done. And the problem is, Ole Miss this year has the 2nd highest graded defensive line in college football with a 91.1 mark. Only Michigan has a higher graded defensive line than Ole Miss this year. The Rebels lead the Power 4 with 45 sacks. They have 220 pressures on the year. That's the most in the country. And they're also, Dawn, really good at defending the run. They're great at obviously getting after the quarterback. They're even better defending the run. They lead the nation with a 95.6 run defense grade this year. They have the 3rd fewest yards per attempt allowed at 3.6, and the fewest yards before contact allowed at 0.7 per attempt. That's also an issue because Georgia wants to establish the run in order to limit obvious passing situations. But right now, the Bulldogs are 7th in rushing grade at 90.7, but they're only 67th in run blocking grade. So as good as the offensive line has been in protecting Carson Beck, it's been about average in run blocking this year. And again, you mentioned this time and time again talking about Carson Beck. Beck's play action grade is over 20 points higher than when he's asked to drop back in standard drop back. So he needs the run game to get into the play action where he's been really successful this year, and he needs his offensive line to protect him, because if not, Ole Miss has a really big advantage defensively.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you look at the struggles of this Georgia offense and Carson Beck, they've been pretty consistent, right? I think it's things we've seen ever since even the 1-point win they had over Kentucky. And let me throw you something, okay? Carson Beck has a 78.1 passing grade this season. Solid stuff, right? Above average stuff. Most of that comes from shredding the 2 worst teams in the SEC, Mississippi State and Auburn, right? He had those 2 great games after rebounding the second half against Alabama. But if you take out those 2 games, he's got a 66.2 passing grade with 6 big-time throws and 11 turnover-worthy plays. We're talking about a guy who, outside of 2 games, has honestly played below average football. And I would be concerned about it, especially if they don't get the run game going and Kirby Smart doesn't just dominate on defense like they did against Texas, right? Because here was we go back to the Texas game, and we thought, okay, if Georgia's going to beat Texas, it's because Carson Beck was so much better than Quinn Ewers that they're going to win the ball game and the quarterbacks will be the difference. Well, that was the case. But it wasn't because Carson Beck graded a 90 and Quinn was a 60. It's because Quinn Ewers had 6 or 7 turnover-worthy plays, and Texas offense was just a disaster, right? Even Carson Beck in that game, did he throw 2 or 3 interceptions in that game?
Yeah, I think 3.
I mean, he's got, 10 or 11 in his last 5? It has not been pretty for Carson Beck this year, right? Losing Brock Bowers, losing Ladd McConkey. And against a defense like this, I do have my concerns about this Georgia offense. And because anytime they've played a good defense this year, even last week against Florida, it took them a long time to get going in that game. And it was really, again, because DJ, it's reasonable to think that Florida could have beat them with DJ playing the whole game.
Probably would have.
It
was a tie game with 5 minutes left.
This Georgia team, I know they beat Texas, but they have cracks for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dolan, ultimately, will Ole Miss keep their playoff hopes alive and almost clinch a playoff spot, or will Georgia kill those hopes for the Rebels?
I actually think of all the games we have today, this was the hardest one to
Agreed.
pick.
Completely agreed.
On the road, Ole Miss is really good. They've gotten hot the last 2 weeks on offense. That was really impressive what they did to Arkansas. And I know Arkansas' secondary isn't great, but it's really impressive what they did to Arkansas last week. I originally picked Georgia. My first instinct was to pick Georgia. And really, the biggest reason I think you would pick Georgia in this game is because they're Georgia, right? And they have Kirby Smart. We saw what he did to Texas, so he's always just got the master game plan. But if I took the logos off the helmets and the way they've played football, especially the last couple weeks, I think Ole Miss might be slightly better. And I think if Jackson Dart can do what he's done the last couple weeks and set up the deep shots and work within that kind of intermediate range before they really get into all the crazy stuff and throwing over the top to Trey Harris, because Georgia's not allowing those home run balls like that, right? If Jackson Dart can come out and play the way he's played for actually most of this season, because he is one of the highest graded quarterbacks in the country, and we don't see something significantly better against a really good Ole Miss. This Ole Miss defense is elite, man. It's an elite unit that's played elite football all season. I'm taking Ole Miss 24-20. I just think I want to say they're actually the better team, and Georgia just knows how to win, and that's why they win. And that might come back to bite me here, but I think if Jackson Dart stays hot like this, like he has the last 2 weeks, and Trey Harris is healthy, I'm going to take him at home. I'm just so concerned about this Georgia offense, and it's the one part sticking with me is that, again, if Lagway played the entire game last week, I think Florida would have beat them. Yeah. And it's just, with Georgia, how many close calls can they get through? And how many times can we just say, well, we know they're better because they beat Texas, right? I mean, if Kirby can put together the master game plan every week, then so be it. I'll be wrong, but I'm going to take the team I think is playing better football right now, Ole Miss.
I think it's so funny that you initially picked Georgia and then switched to Ole Miss, because I initially picked Ole Miss and I'm switched to Georgia. I actually picked Georgia to win this game 28-27. I think the offensive line would do just enough for Beck to do just enough. And then what really was the deciding factor for me in this one, I think Kirby Smart is just going to outcoach Lane Kiffin at times on defense. Right? You look at what they've done so far this year and just how much they confuse Steve Sarkisian. Even Steve Sarkisian is maybe the best offensive coach in the country that we have right now. Lane Kiffin's certainly up there as well. I'm not trying to take anything away from Lane Kiffin, but you've seen times where Ole Miss's offensive line, and Texas has a great offensive line, Ole Miss's offensive line has really struggled this year. And I think Kirby, with all the blitz packages he does, all the stunts he does, he's really going to confuse them, honestly. And you saw even last year, I know it's a completely different Ole Miss team than we had last year, but it was a blowout because really Lane Kiffin just could not figure it out against Kirby Smart's defense. Until proven otherwise, I'm going to trust that Kirby Smart's going to do that here. So I have him winning this one 28-27. Like you said, though, this is by far the hardest game to pick because on paper, everything we've been talking about, I'm like, yeah, that sounds like it favors Ole Miss, but I'm still trusting Kirby Smart to win this big game here, and I think Ole Miss's playoff hopes die in a game that should come down to the final seconds.
I think that's the biggest part that concerns me because when in the trenches when Georgia has the ball, it's probably a push.
It's a push,
the way
yeah.
Ole Miss defensive line has been playing, and I think Georgia does have the advantage between the talent up front for them. I think especially Jalen Walker could be a serious problem. And I mentioned last week how much Ole Miss's offense has struggled up front, in recent weeks, the last 4 or 5 games. So I think Georgia does have an advantage in the trenches that I would be worried about, but I just this is a hard one. This is a really hard one. I'm going with the home team. I think the Rebels I couldn't even tell you honestly how, except for Jackson Dart plays as well as he played last week and even the week before. He's been really good lately.
Yeah, I can't wait for that game. It's going to be an unbelievable game, and obviously Ole Miss with their season on the line basically in that one. So really excited for that one. Hey, thanks for watching another episode of the PFF College Football Show. Please make sure you guys subscribe to the channel.
Also, subscribe to PFF Plus at subscribe.pff.com for all of the same data and grades that we use in our show, plus fantasy tools, betting tools, and our mock draft simulator.